Welcome back to Education Matters. Did you correctly answer false? Current state law only requires that 50% of charter school teachers to be licensed in North Carolina. We're going to continue our discussion about the Teacher March and other education news happenings with two of the best reporters in the business. We have Kelly Hinchcliffe, she is the education reporter for WRAL News, and Jeff Tiberii, who is the Capitol Bureau Chief for WUNC Radio. So thank you both for coming back on the show. It's always good to see you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, obviously, I want to talk a little bit first about the Teacher March. Kelly, you've covered it. You've covered some of the reaction. I guess just sort of give me your, you were here last year too for the march. Sort of give me a little bit of take on, some of the rhetoric and the issues and sort of what's the same, what's changed.
I can tell you the number one question I get about the march this year is, will it be bigger than last year? And of course, we don't know yet, but one of the things that we can compare are the number of school districts that are closing. We know last year, 42 out of the state's 115 school districts closed. So far, we have more than a dozen that have closed, but there's still time. A lot can change. Some school districts last year decided to close closer to the actual date of the march or the rally. So it'll be interesting to see, but the rhetoric has certainly ramped up this year, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, and Jeff, you're down at the legislature a lot. Is the, I don't know, is the tenor, the tone different about the, I mean, I don't know, from my own observation, it seems a little more pointed, but maybe not.
In terms of the rhetoric,
yeah.
I think the rhetoric is certainly more pointed. We've seen in a number of the addresses from Phil Berger's office, from the press releases. I mean, they have framed the NCAE as a left-wing organization. I think they're trying to discredit them before this event even takes place, right? It's not an election year, so I wonder how, if at all, that will factor into this. As Kelly mentioned, we have a number of school closings, not as many yet as last year, but some of the biggest districts in the state. And I also do wonder about the role that Reverend William Barber may or may not play in this. He is now going to be permitted to be back in the building. He's been involved in a number of protests, and he's been banned from the building for a while, but that ban just recently this week was lifted. He tends to attract bigger crowds.
Right.
So what role does he play here? And I guess, hopefully not too voyeuristically, but I'm wondering if we're going to see arrests this year. Full disclosure, I was on paternity leave last year, and I was not at the rally, but I don't believe there were any arrests. So I'm interested to see if, I mean, to your question about tone and tenor, if on May 1st there is a different tone or tenor, either in full or in part.
Right. Well, Kelly, the issues that Mark Jewell just talked about, I mean, some of these are similar. I mean, and there's some action around, in fact, like, for example, Medicaid expansion. I mean, there was just a press conference, and Jeff can weigh in on this too. I mean, there was literally just a press conference, Republican press conference. Don't call it Medicaid expansion, but that's really what it was, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell you what, it's been interesting seeing from the different sides who have been talking about this rally. We've even seen from the state superintendent, Mark Johnson, who has come out, pretty forcefully this year, and basically he's pleading with teachers not to go to this rally. He's especially concerned when you look at schools that were affected by the hurricane and how much school those students lost, and he's saying that you need to keep kids in school. So it's been interesting to kind of see how people have been responding to this.
All right, well, let me ask you, this is obviously connected to funding. I mean, this is certainly part of it. I mean, it's a big part of it, salaries, school resources. We are maybe 2-3 weeks away from the House unveiling a budget. You've been following this for years, how this whole process works. So they'll unveil those first. So I guess first, what do you think this is sort of what is that going to look like? And then I did want to ask you, as I mentioned before we started taping this, some things have changed about what happens whether this budget gets vetoed or not.
So to me, one of the interesting dynamics potentially for the very day of May 1st is going to be the inside-outside dynamic. And I think that it is quite possible you're going to have thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of educators and education supporters outside the building, some inside the building. And we might also be at a key moment in House budget deliberations. It might be before the full House Appropriations Committee that day. The House budget could be on the floor that day. So that's kind of an interesting
Right, the Speaker Moore has
moment.
said, I mean, they've said the end of April, right? Early May at the latest.
And so it could be that day. I mean, and that would make for some interesting challenges for us reporters in terms of how do you cover both of those? How do you weave those two together? Because of course, inherently they are connected. So I guess I'm looking for the timing of that on the House budget side. And in terms of the change that's in place in 2019 in relation to recent years, if lawmakers do not reach a budget deal by July 1st, there is a state law, a relatively new, last couple of years, state law that has been enacted so that if there's no budget, the previous spending levels merely continue, simply continue.
So let me, because that's something that I've been hearing people saying. Well, the governor, there's no supermajority. The governor can veto the budget, so they'll have to work together. What I'm hearing is that no. I mean, actually, the governor could veto it. They could not reach a deal, and it will just revert back to last year's, almost like in D.C. terms, like a continuing resolution.
Right, but they don't even have to pass the continuing resolution.
It just happens.
And this might be a little bit extreme, but to take it to the other end of it, they don't have to pass a budget for a year or 2 years. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. We're going to have some sort of stalemate. Right. We saw this in 2015.
Well, Republicans have priorities too that they want to get in there, so it's probably not. But it is something I think it's interesting to watch.
Right.
All right, Kelly, I want to get to you. You were a central figure in a press conference a couple of weeks ago. I thought Superintendent Mark Johnson rolled out a proposal, which I think initially people thought it's for $400 for teachers to buy supplies for their own classroom, but it kind of became a little more controversial when the last year's North Carolina Teacher of the Year was advertised and then wasn't there. So tell me a little bit about that.
So we went to the press conference, and it was advertised, as you mentioned, that the Teacher of the Year, Lisa Godwin, would be there, and she was noticeably absent. And so I asked the superintendent, why is she not here? And, do you think that she supports this, what you guys are presenting? And he was under the impression that she did support it. And when I spoke with her later, she basically said that she would have supported it if she felt like this was money above and beyond, but she understood this to be a reallocation of money. Basically, the plan is to give every teacher $400 so they can buy school supplies instead of routing that money through the boards of education to decide.
Right. So what else are you chasing right now? You mentioned something about some changes with substitute teachers.
Yeah, interesting story about substitute teachers in North Carolina. I learned something new, that they are not regulated at all by the state, that each local school district has the ability to decide how they want to hire them, what certifications, or not certifications, but what, think of the word.
The credentials,
Thank you, what credentials they would have. And part of doing that reporting, I found out that in Wake County, you did not have to have a high school diploma. So in essence, you could be substitute teaching students who may have more education than you do. And so we reported that story, and Wake County has since said that they're going to add that back in. Beginning next school year, substitutes will have to have a high school diploma.
Well, we want to wrap up with you, Jeff. I guess same question. What are you chasing? What are you watching for? Like any markers in the budget or certain bills?
The big one, of course, is how much additional money is set aside for teachers and salaries. And I think one of the points of rhetoric we've heard frequently from education supporters is that pre-recession spending levels, we're not back up to pre-recession spending levels when adjusted for inflation. So is that, it's a little wonky, right? But is that something that's going to be achieved later this year?
Right. Any other hot votes coming up? A couple of things came up around sort of virtual preschool yesterday, but anything else?
I'm interested to see what happens with broadband in rural counties. I think that's on the periphery to an extent, but that is a pretty important issue for K-12 and learning, I think.
Great. Well, look, thank you both for being here. We'll have you back on. Maybe we'll have to, after the March and sort of after the budgets, I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk more about some of these issues. But thank you for what you do and for keeping us informed and for coming on the show. So thanks so much, both.
Thank you.
After the break, this week's final word.